Nish Majmudar. Let me give you a little bit background introduction about myself. I am Director of Cybersecurity Engineering at CareFirst FEPOC, and I manage, as part of engineering, I manage everything from identity security, identity access management, to data security, to endpoint and network security, application security. So all of the deployments, all of the initiatives around all of these domains, my team is responsible for engineering the solution and then putting it in operations, where my peer takes over on day-to-day management of those solutions. Having said that, data security is something that's pretty close to my heart. I've done a lot of these things, solutioning as well as operations over the last few years, and sort of understand from end to end how do we protect data that's to any organization, what we call is crown jewel, right? You know, whether it's PII, member information, PHI, your PCI card information, things like that. How do you protect? How do you build a data security program or team, or make sure all your compliance and controls are also met at the same time? So without further ado, I would like to share my screen, unless question for Singh. Do you guys have my presentation that you're going to share, or I can open up one?
Yeah, if you can share your screen, we'll be able to view it.
Okay, just give me a second here. Sorry, guys, I was running around because my daughter was sick earlier today, so just came back from doctor's office. So give me a second. Let me pull up my presentation here. Okay, let me know if you guys can see my screen.
We can see it, and if you put it in present mode, you'll have the full screen.
Okay. Please walk me through, being a non-technical, non-IT, non-cybersecurity person, how do I do this in presentation mode?
It'll be down towards the bottom.
Okay. There it is. Slider. It should be this one.
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. Is that better, or should I make it larger? Yeah. Maybe remove this. Okay, I'll go back here. All right, so data protection. So basically, if I can bring this here. So how do you build data protection, right? There's two pillars to protecting data within your organization, right? One is the technical aspects of how do you what sort of controls you can put on your data, whether it's encryption, masking, tokenization, your DLP, and access authorization and things like that, right? So one is technical controls you can put it, and then the second piece to it is more of compliance, regulation, classification, putting a data governance around it. That actually helps the security control, because without knowing what sort of regulations or compliance or classification that is mandatory for your organization, the rest of the technical controls that you would put on it wouldn't really matter, because you really have to know exactly what are these, what are the regulation industry standard compliances that your organization is required, right? So so let's focus on the data privacy side of it, and then we'll talk about the technical side of it, right? So and from data privacy, obviously, depending on where your organization is, who do you, what kind of member information, what data you're protecting, you may be required to follow GDPR, CCPA, and now we're seeing a lot of states here in US, they're coming up with their own compliance. So those are some of the things your compliance team would have to mandate as to what we're required to follow, right? Regulations, again, depending on whether you're a healthcare sector, HIPAA, financial sector, SOX, and so on and so forth, right? And those are other regulations that we need to be compliant by. And then um, depending on, right, what standards are you has your company or organization adopted to it, right? Do you need to be, you're following NEST, FSMA, if you're federal government, and things like that, right? So those are one of the first pillars that you need to make sure that what are we trying to protect? How are we going to be compliant? So when the audit comes, you could show that these are the steps you've taken, right? The next step is doing a classification, having an organization-wide a good classification system. Just saying that we need to be PHI compliant or PII compliant is not enough, because in PHI there's 29 different elements of PHI. Are we going to treat all 29 with the same sensitivity? Um, so those are, I think we're going to have to break it down, those elements, and whether some are sensitive, secret, can anything be public, depending on your organization, right? Again, there are other type of data like IP addresses, host names, and things like that you'd have to consider also when you're designing a classification system. So once you have your classification system, then you know exactly what is sensitive, what is secret, and what sort of technical controls you can put on it, right? Um, so those privacy and classification were the first two. The next thing is data governance. Now, data governance is actually a really it's I call data governance more like the zero trust. It's a wishful state to be in. To get there is almost it could take years and years to build the entire data governance program, right? To build a data governance program, you need to be, once you identified your classification system, then you need to build data governance, which will tag your data at a data element level, that this is a sensitive data, this is a secret data. Data lineage is something, once you tag that data, you need to be able to identify how that data is flowing within your infrastructure from one end to the other end, is so that building that lineage from web server to application server to um, ultimately to the UI of end user, right? How is it being shown? And that flow is critical to identifying if you have unsecure protocols, or data is moving in clear text or not, right? So building that data lineage is a critical part of this. Um, and there are other, building data dictionary, data catalog, that all goes, so that really identifies exactly where do you have your crown jewels, or where your sensitive data is. Building that data dictionary catalog helps you helps you apply the next piece of it, which is the technical controls, right? So if we go to next slide, and by the way, guys, if I'm going a little bit faster here, just let me know. We'll take the questions. I want to keep this as open as I want to learn from you guys, what you guys are doing across here. So we'll open it up. I'd like to hear more from you as to what you guys are doing around this, some of these technical or non-technical controls, right? So so going into this actual technical controls, this is where majority of my experience is, right? Most I built data security programs from scratch. Um, so now when you identified, you build data governance, you identified what data is you're trying to protect and where in which databases do they reside. Data governance will even go to the point of which tables do they reside in, right? So the next piece would be applying data at rest encryption. Now you know that, okay, you have these data, this is your crown jewels, your member information. The next piece would be make sure that they are you applied it data at rest encryption. Data in transit is again when you build your data lineage, that would identify right where how the data is moving from one end to the other end. If there is any unsecured protocol, any clear text, the PHI, PII information that's moving across in clear text, that's where then you as your data security team would take that analysis and make sure you are you're enabling this application teams to use secure protocols. So if they need to go back and recode their application to use instead of HTTP, HTTPS, or enable TLS, or what any other unsecure protocols that they're using, right? So that's the next step. Next thing is applying static and dynamic masking, right? So obviously your production data that you have, that you identified where your sensitive data is, and you don't want that production data to be copied over into your test environment or dev environment where developers are testing new code against it and easily able to see this data, right? So that static masking is something you would apply an algorithm over that data. So uh, that data is overwritten with the test data, and when it moves to dev environment, there is no um, real data. That's static, basically static masking. And dynamic masking is your production data that is still out there. That is crown jewel, right? You want to make sure that yes, your privileged users, your DBAs and system admins would would be able to decrypt it because they need to perform admin activities on it. So they, even though it's encrypted, they would have authority to decrypt it. But now we know exactly which tables they belong to. We can apply dynamic masking. So when admins are working on databases or application admins, they don't really need to look at customer information on that column. They don't need to look at SSN. They don't need to look at other sensitive information. So dynamic masking is just they're pulling up application, they're pulling up databases, and those columns appears as stars or X's on those sensitive fields. So you want to apply those. Um, so it's again, insider threat. Insider is probably, as we all know, industry standard, right? It's the biggest threat. And getting your privileged user to be not exposed to that sensitive information is key part to this. Again, and so next piece is tokenization. Tokenization, encryption, masking, they go hand in hand. Tokenization is just one step above. I think it takes tokenization does take impact on performance. So I consider it as optional, but it's something that people should consider depending on what organization you're in. So that's data protection from encryption and masking point of view. And there are for all of these solutions, there are some really good solutions out there industry-wide. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me. I worked for each of these. I worked on some of these industry standard solutions. I've done some POCs also. Um, so there is a question from Jamie here. Um, and should I let's just take the question on this slide first, and then we'll move on to the next slide. What if you're using an older legacy application that doesn't allow for encryption? Do you have any suggestions? Um, okay, so that this is a really good question. So I'm actually working on something to remediate some of these right now, right? So we, at my current organization, we do have a lot of applications that are mainframe based, right? And there's transactions happening between mainframe and our Linux operating system where first data in motion, not all of the channels are properly protected. So we're working on it, and then some we're analyzing it. So I think at the end of it, I think your legacy application would have to go through a retransformation, recoding. I know it's not an answer you're looking for, but again, it depends on the appetite of risk of your organization. If your organization risk team is willing to take that, accept that risk, right? Again, we all have to weigh the, um, return, right? Return on investment. If it's going to cost a lot, whether it's worth it. For me, I think it's worth it, but it's an organization-wide call. But most of these legacy applications do go through recoding, and that's exactly what we're addressing, how we're addressing. Um, so another question here is which methods is preferred? So I'm going to in which particular technology is this question referred to? Is it referred to in terms of data at rest encryption or static and dynamic masking? I'm not sure, but data at rest encryption, again, there are multiple technologies that offer different levels of FIPS compliance type of encryption. I think so, depending on your company, which compliance you are going by, there are different algorithms, right? And so you would make sure that you are compliant by those. There's another. I hope I answered that question. Um, if not, feel free to ask me again in more specific way. Um, So this is driven by many requirements. Which functions within an org is best to drive data management and data protection? Okay, that's a good question. I think it's and you're Peter, you're exactly right. I think, like I said, it's a combination of compliance, privacy, data governance, and data security, right? So your compliance group will address your compliance that you need to follow, right? Privacy would identify or may be responsible for classification, right? Because they are the ones who are going to decide what privacy rules or classification rules applies to what type of data. So that's where it would come from. And then data governance is a big team that builds the entire data governance of program, identifies which data is exactly in which databases and whether it's structured or unstructured format, right? And then I think as a data security team, us as cybersecurity people, right, because that's where I come from, we take all those requirements and then we apply our security controls on top of it, whether it's encryption. So I think to answer your question, it's a combination of 3 or 4 teams depending on the organization you're in. Rajiv is asking, data at rest, what do you see in practice? Data encrypted at the disk storage level or application level? I think it is both. Um, so disk storage level these days is pretty standard, right? Any of your storage companies, the disk storage, the disk encryption is pretty standard offering. Even in AWS, it is pretty, it's by default, your disks are encrypted. But at the application level is preferred method, according to me, I think, because at that point now you can apply a fine-grained authorization policies also as to which processes, which users can actually decrypt it. Not only decrypt it, there is read-only and write-only policy on that. You can also apply read, write, executable type of policies um, at, uh, at that encryption. So somebody can read, decrypt and only read it, and some other use a backup process might just be allowed to decrypt and read it, right? And then an admin DBA might have other access, right? So I think at application level, it does make more sense to go with. I think I answered those questions. Let's move on to next slide here. Okay, so uh, we applied data encryption, right? And, whether it's at rest, in motion, or in mask and data masking, right? Next thing is, I think, the data loss prevention. Again, considering that insider threat inside our privileged users, our users knowingly, unknowingly can uh, can cause data loss of an organization. So to have that data loss prevention program built is again key, because these are the users that have access to these data. So how do you protect from them not misusing the data, right? So obviously you got to build a DLP program so that it's monitoring all outbound emails, right? To make sure that your customer data is not being sent out of organization, right? Anything network traffic scan, you want to be able to scan all your traffic that's going outbound, whether it's HTTPS, HTTP, or FTP, FTPS. Want to make sure that you're looking at what data is going outbound and being able to scan it. USB downloads, making sure, first of all, I think USBs on your company-owned devices should be locked, and only exception-based users should be allowed to download that data and download. There may be a business reason for some folks to be able to download it, but then when they're downloading it, you want to be able to scan that data to make sure that you're not losing any private information, sensitive information being downloaded, right? If people are printing jobs, right, that has information, again, you want to be able to scan the print jobs and be able to block it, right? Or be able to create an incident. Structured data scan. So this is this is structured data scan and unstructured data scan. So this is more of this is more of an environment where you're not supposed to have DLP. We've done the static in the previous slide. We talked about static masking, right? So we've done static masking, and lower environment is not supposed to have any PHI, PII type of information. But once in a while, you'll find a developer with having multiple access in upper environment, prod environment, and also in lower environment, they copy the data that shouldn't be there. So you want to run a quarterly, monthly, whatever schedule. You want to be able to run a scan of that databases to identify there's truly not a um, production data sitting in there, right? Unstructured data scan, again, do you really want users to have PHIPI information and on their laptops, personal drives, or OneDrive, SharePoint, right? If people have sent internal emails with documents attached, with sensitive information document attached, guess what? Now that document is sitting in your sent folder, as well as it's sitting in the other person's inbox. And so if we maybe we should scan the mailboxes, right? Uh, maybe we should scan Windows share drives, right, to identify uh, unstructured data scan. Unstructured data scanning is really one of the very complicated, tough piece of it. At least structured, we've identified from our CMDB, from our asset, exactly which databases are supposed to have PHIPI, and we know it. Unstructured SharePoint, which SharePoint site has it? It's tough. So you scan it. The whole cycle of that unstructured scan is once you find it, you go through data attestation piece, which we're building in my current organization. Is we're building a data attestation process where we reach out to the business owner of um, that that particular data owner, right? So they are required to provide business justification why that needs to stay there, right? Or else they're going to have to remove it, right? And if it needs to stay there, then obviously you want to apply data at rest encryption on it. Once you identify that data is staying in OneDrive or SharePoint, right? You apply that encryption, and then do an annual reattestation. So so that business justification still holds year after year, right? So and some of the policies your cybersecurity leadership or your leadership would have to decide whether, okay, email boxes, no attachments with PHI, you got to remove it. There's no business justification allowed, right? Something like that. So it all depends on the appetite of the company, but more or less you're going to have to build a program so you can clearly identify where your sensitive data resides and how do you protect it, right? So that's DLP. Let's see, there's a few questions here. Um, do you use data classification tool to enforce data classification? If so, which tool? So unfortunately, I am not so familiar with other data classification tools because that's more done in every place that I've been. They either compliance or privacy has been doing it. I'm not sure which tool they're using it. What we've done, what my team has done over the years that I've enforced cybersecurity to do it is we made sure that our asset management tool has the right classification applied to the data class to all the assets. If you guys want to hold on a second, please, I'm going to plug in my laptop here. It's running out of battery. Give me a second. Okay. Sorry, and thank you about that. I'm back. All right. So that data classification tool, I don't know, but what we've done from cybersecurity point of view is we made sure that all assets are being tagged into asset management system, and that we made that as a mandatory field. So a data into asset management system cannot be saved it's if that field is not filled out, right? And business owner, when they request new server to be built, they know what data they're going to be put in, so they're required to input that data as part of the new ticket process that they create to build a server. So that's the process that we've done. But unfortunately, for the exact answer, I don't know the answer to your question. Sorry about that. Uranus has some capabilities of scanning. Um, sure, yeah. And Peter, was that an answer from the classification point of view? Is that um, the question answer? Okay, so there it is. Thanks, Peter. And the next question is, which data asset management product do you adopt? So right now we have a product we're using called Asset Manager. Then we in previous other companies there were other tools that obviously we've used CMDB in the past. forgot which CMDB it was, but there's a bunch of them. I think Asset Manager right now works. Technopedia is another one. I think it works pretty good. Technopedia goes and scans through. You assign your IP addresses, and it pretty much scans and looks for any assets, right? Pulls up the information, and if that's not been properly tagged, then it goes into a recon, quarterly recon that the tech asset management team is supposed to do, run quarterly recon to make sure all the assets are properly tagged. Okay. So that is DLP. Okay, next is data protection. So yeah, I'm coming towards the end of my presentation. I'll wrap it up. This is last two slides here. So data security. So we talked about DLP, we talked about encryption, masking, right? And so these are having a good identity access management program and having a good privileged user activity monitoring is obviously next step to building this, completing that circle, right? Having a good IAM program so that users are not given more than what they're required to, right? So role-based access, right? Even after role-based access, you can even do fine-grained authorization to only limited sets of a table besides masking and things like that, right? Obviously building a UAR, right? Access review program quarterly, making sure your privileged users are still certified by their management to having certain access. So that all goes as having a good solid IAM team and program helps out. Privileged user activity monitoring. Again, you wanna be able to monitor your DBAs, your system admins, or any application admins to see what they're doing. Send that data to your team, build some alerts onto it, right? And things like that. If they're making changes to a database, which is not associated with a change ticket, you should be able to flag it, right? And things like that. So just next again. So this is the last piece of slide. Basically, just goes and talks about what I just pretty much talked about here. You know, you start with classification, discovery, having a good IAM program where you're assigning the role-based access, right? Applying tagging as part of data governance, encryption, masking, and tokenization, building a good DLP programs, making sure the data is not flowing outbound, and then monitoring and alerting, creating a good monitoring program just in case, you know, even after all these controls, if some user does something that and is able to do it, you're able to alert and take an action on it, right? So in a nutshell, I think this at a high level, obviously there's lots that goes in building this type of program. You know, depends. These are not any by any means any. You know, these are pretty expensive tools, expensive programs, initiatives, right? It depends on organizations' appetite, and so that that it is. So any questions? We probably have, I think, 5-7 minutes left. Any questions or any suggestions what you guys do?
Anyone has any questions, you can use the Q&A feature, or the chat function works as well. I think Nish has been monitoring that. You got one in the
Yes.
chat, Nish?
Yeah.
Jake?
Yeah, Jake, thank you. Yes, I've looked at the O365 DLP DLP offering, right? And they've got definitely they have some good features, but I was surprised to find out that what Microsoft does not have right now is not being able to scan any of the O365 mailboxes. I was really surprised that they don't have that feature, whereas some of the other DLP tools are able to do that. So
Nish, Peter's asking a question here. How would a chief data officer layer into this?
Can you repeat that, please?
So Peter Nguyen is asking a question. How would a chief data officer layer into this? What role would they play?
Yeah, so chief data officer is where I think the data governance program would reside in, right? A lot of teams, chief data officer compliance, at least I know privacy and data governance program would ultimately fall under chief data officer. So that's where I think chief data officer can drive a lot of these data governance, and obviously they'll work with CISO to make sure that data security is around their their data governance or their programs that they've tagged, data that they've tagged. So I think chief data officer does have a big say in this. Any other questions? Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Thanks everyone for asking good questions. I actually like to do this in person, because in person I think we can ask a lot of questions and there's a lot of back and forth when people ask questions. But again, thank you for giving me the opportunity here to talk to you guys. All of these topics are pretty close to my heart. I love talking about cybersecurity. Application security is another topic that's pretty close to me. So one of these days, I'll probably do something on application security also, if you guys are up for it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nish. This was great.